Dear participant, welcome and good morning, good afternoon or good evening, depending on from which part of the world you are connected from. So welcome to this highrisk plant webinar, and before starting the presentation, let me give you some basic introduction and introduce myself. I'm Ciro Gardi, and I'm the coordinator of the high-risk plants activity within the European Food Safety Authority. So some information on the application that you are using for attending this webinar. In the image that is at the bottom of the slide, you can see the structure of the application, and the main window that you have, that is at the top left of your screen, is dedicated to the presentation. You will see in a few minutes the presentation there. There is a window on top right where you can use for posing questions related to the topic of this webinar, so on high-risk plants. You can start already now posing a question. And then there is a window that is at the bottom, and this window should be used only for communicating possible technical issues. For instance, if you have experiencing a problem with the connection or the audio, you can digit here and you will receive the support from our IT colleagues. This webinar is recorded and will be available after a few days after the conclusion of the webinar. The webinar is in English, and also the questions should be submitted in English. As you know, the topic of the webinar is dedicated to high-risk plants. This is not the first webinar we organize on high-risk plants here at EFSA, but is the third of a series. And in particular is also a contribution of EFSA to the International Year of Plant Health. So in these terms, it's the second webinar after the one on horizon scanning that EFSA is organizing as a contribution for the celebration of the International Year of Plant Health that is this year, 2020. And let me also introduce our valuable speaker that will present you and introduce this topic. So Laura Carotti, Orestia Sfera, and Elzbieta Mikulova, that are our trainees, and they are working since several months on this topic on high-risk plants, and so they are very, very well knowledgeable on this topic, and they will provide you explanation on several topics that could be of your interest. And a few words on the structure of the webinar. So at the beginning, they will provide an introduction and provide a background on the reason why the European Union decided to carry on commodity risk assessment. After this, they will provide some insight on the EU legislation related to high-risk plants. So, of course, it will not be an overview of the entire EU legislation on plant health, but will be focused on high-risk plants topic. After this, the very important part is also the lesson learned. In fact, after 1 year of experience, we got we learned some lesson, and we think that now there is also margin for improvement. So, especially with the support of you, of the applicant countries, of the organization that are preparing and submitting the dossier, we can improve the quality and increase the efficiency of the work we are doing. After this, there will be the question and answer session. And of course, as I told you, you can pose already the question and then will be answered during also the webinar. And after the closure of the question and answer session, there will be the closure of the webinar. So now, it is my pleasure to give the floor to the first speaker, that is Laura Carotti.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let's start the webinar with some background on our activities. The trade in plants for planting, that includes rooted and unrooted plants, cuttings and bulbs, is the major pathway for the introduction of pests and pathogens that can damage crops and plants in general. As shown in this graph, the import of plants for planting from third countries into the European Union in the last 15 years has almost doubled. This process can increase the number of pathways and, of course, can increase the probability of introduction of pests and pathogens. Several are the pests that has been introduced by trade in the European Union. Here in this slide we can see some of the examples. For instance, among the others, we can mention the red palm weevil, the first insect here in the slide, that has been introduced by import of infested palm material. Or to do another example, we can mention a nematode, the pine wood nematode, that has been introduced in the European Union by trade of infested pine wood material. The introduced pest can have an environmental and economic impact. Really relevant is the example of Xylella fastidiosa. In fact, Xylella fastidiosa is one of the most dangerous plant pathogenic bacteria worldwide, and in 2013 has been detected in south of Europe. And according to some habitat suitability models, in south of Europe, up to 98% of the olive cultivated area is suitable territory for the pest spread. If we focus on the economic situation and we analyze the case of Italy, the situation is quite relevant. In fact, according to some prediction, the potential economic impact could reach 5 billion euros over the next 50 years. Therefore, considering the relevance of the situation, let's see what is the European Union doing to prevent the entry of pests. Orestia, can you tell us something about the European measures?
Yes, sure, Laura. Thank you for your question. Actually, the European Union and its member states have taken several measures to prevent the entry and potentially the spread of pests in the European territory. But among others, they have established some regulations concerning high-risk plants, and actually that I'm going to be focused on today. Specifically, in the regulation of 2016-2031, they describe the protective measures against pest of plants, and in Article 42, they provide the definition of high-risk plants. Then, in the regulation 2018-2018, the procedure of commodity risk assessment for these high-risk plants is described. And finally, in the regulation 2018-2019, all the high-risk plants are listed. But what exactly are these high-risk plants? In this slide, you can see the 4 different categories of high-risk plants defined by the corresponding regulation. The first category includes plants for planting and specifically consists of 34 genera and 1 species, Ficus carica. Then, the second category is Ullucus tuberosus plants. And for these 2 categories, there is a general ban from all third countries that want to continue the trade of these plants, and a risk assessment is required. The third category refers to Momortica fruits, and the ban here refers to countries where Thrips palmi is present only. The fourth category is wood of ulmus, and the ban concerns third countries where Saperta tridentata is present. So what are the steps of this commodity risk assessment? So a third country that wants to continue the trade with the European Union should submit a dossier containing specific details about the plant commodity. This can be done only by the National Plant Protection Organization of its country, and this dossier is sent to the European Commission, and if the dossier is complete, then the European Commission sends it to EFSA to perform this assessment. After the first evaluation, in case more information is needed, the dossier should be sent back to the National Plant Protection Organization of this country to request this missing information. EFSA, with the support of experts with different background, conducts these risk assessments. The output of the commodity risk assessment is published in the form of scientific opinion on the EFSA journal, and it's open to everyone. Then, finally, the European Commission, in the role of risk manager, based on the outcome of the scientific opinion, will take the final decision on the continuation or not of the trade of this specific commodity importing from this specific country. So, next, Laura, could you please tell us more about what exactly third countries should do?
Of course, Orestia, and thank you for your explanation about the European measures. As you mentioned, the role of the third country is to prepare and to submit the dossier to the European Commission. The dossier is really important since it is the starting point of the entire procedure, and it should contain as much information as possible in order to allow EFSA to conduct the commodity risk assessment. The dossier is composed of three main sections. The first section is dedicated to the description of the commodity, to be imported, of course. The second section focuses on the pest list, while the third and the last section is dedicated to the phytosanitary mitigation measures applied from the third country. The pest list, that is the second section of the dossier, should contain all the pests that are associated with the commodity and that are present in the third country. The pests that are currently regulated in the European Union are listed in the Commission Implementing Regulation 2019-2072. In case you would like to have a look at the document, you can find here the link, or otherwise we will provide all the useful links at the end of the presentation. All the information that are provided by the third country are used by EFSA to conduct the quantitative commodity risk assessment. In fact, EFSA expresses the likelihood that a specific pest is present in the nursery or in the place of production using the information provided by the third country in the dossier that concern the origin of planting material, the characteristic of the nursery or of the place of production, and the characteristic concerning the environment surrounding the nursery or the place of production. Then, starting from this likelihood, EFSA evaluates the risk mitigation measures applied by the third country to reduce or to avoid the pest presence. The final outcome is the likelihood that the commodity is pest-free from a specific pest. In fact, the process is repeated for each pest we consider to be potentially risky. The final likelihood is represented in a quantitative way by the graph you can see here in the slide, and that of course you can find in every scientific opinion of EFSA concerning the commodity risk assessment. So here in EFSA we have been conducting this type of activity on high-risk plant for 1 year. So Betty, can you explain what we have learned after 1 year of dossier evaluation?
Thank you, Laura. Yes, since last year we have received and evaluated several dossiers, and we have gained some experience which we would like to share with you. So, in the following slides, I would like to concentrate on information, which is crucial when developing a commodity risk assessment. And I would also like to mention why some specific details are needed. In case such information would be lacking in a dossier, EFSA has to request this information from the third country, which of course will delay the process. Firstly, it is important to give a detailed description of the plant commodity, preferably on a species level, to understand better potential pests and pathogens. Because if the commodity is on genus level, there will be more pests to be considered in the commodity risk assessment. Secondly, the information on size, age, and whether the plant is with or without leaves are also critical. Concerning the stem size, this information is essential in order to understand whether some of the pests, such as bark beetles or longhorn beetles, are able to attack this specific commodity. And please don't forget to attach pictures of this commodity. It allows us to visually understand how the plants look like. Similarly, also the description of the nurseries should be detailed in order to assess the likelihood of the spread of some pests within the nursery. It is fundamental to know on whether there is only one or more nurseries, and to provide a map of these locations. In case they are not exclusively exporting nurseries, it is essential to provide details on separation from the other production areas. What is also needed is the description of the production sites. In other words, whether the plants are grown in open fields, under the net, or in greenhouses. Also, other plant species, different from the commodity species that are produced in the nurseries, should be reported, even though they are not the main objective of the risk assessment. We have to consider them because they can serve as a reservoir of other pests. Not only specific details on the nurseries are essential, but also the information about the area surrounding them, like the land use, for example, forests, gardens, meadows, and the presence of other nurseries or other production sites. The crucial questions are: what is the vegetation around? What are the species of trees, shrubs, and weeds? Again, these plant species can be a reservoir of pests. For example, weeds for nematodes, or forest and woody plants for bark beetles. Exact location is needed in understanding the pest presence. Preferably, it would be good to indicate the pest pressure, and also whether for specific pests a pest-free area was declared by the National Plant Protection Organization, just like with Xylella fastidiosa. The information about the production process can help us to assess the likelihood of the pest freedom on the planting material. Firstly, it is important to know the origin of the plant material, such as mother plants, science, or seeds. If they are imported, we need to know from which country. And if they are not imported, we need to know the location of the mother plantation to understand whether some pests or pathogens can be present. Secondly, the period of the year when the commodity is produced should be also reported. It is important to know the phenology of the crop at all stages of the process, just like weeding or pruning, of course, if applicable. And detailed information is needed on the exporting consignment, such as what is the packaging material, how many plants, bags, or pallets are kept together. Using this information, we assess how likely it is for the pest to spread within the packaging if one or more plants are infested. Concerning the pest list compilation, the National Plant Protection Organization should provide a complete list of pests that can be associated with the commodity and that are also present in the third country. Once the full pest list is completed, check if these pests are regulated in the EU or not, according to the relevant Commission regulation. Based on the complete list, a list of pests with potential impact should be provided. The information on how to proceed is available in the dossier requirements published by EFSA. It is available for everyone, and you can get the link at the end of this presentation. One of the essential sections of the dossier are the mitigation measures, which consist of chemical and non-chemical practices. Information regarding the mitigation measures are supporting our assessment and help us understand what the third country does in order to prevent a pest outbreak. Non-chemical practices are worth to mention, whether it is biological control in the greenhouses or a treatment of irrigation water, which can be a source of potential pests and pathogens such as fungi and nematodes. Important aspect is also to check whether some of the EU quarantine pests have a specific requirements from the third countries in order to export to the EU. This can be found on the website of European Commission dealing with emergency measures. And to this group belong, for example, Anoplophora chinensis or Xylella fastidiosa. Information on chemical treatments shall be provided as a calendar with the timing of the application and their effectiveness. It is helpful to indicate also the dose, the active ingredients, the rotation of the pesticides, to understand whether the resistance of the pest could have been developed. Other details to be reported are the phenological stages of treated plants and the targeted pests. It can, for example, happen that the treatment is not effective against the pest because the pest is not present at this certain period of time. Inspection strategies, surveillance, and monitoring systems of the pests associated with the commodity should be described as detailed as possible, not only in the nurseries, but also outside of them. quantitative data are preferable, like on sampling, frequencies, diagnostic protocols, or intensities. Last but not least is the dossier submission. We would like to remind you that the dossier and any other information should be submitted preferably in English. It could also be submitted in any other European language, but then it needs to be translated. And of course, the process takes longer time. It is important to provide also the contact details of the applicant in order for EFSA to ask for more information, of course, if needed. And please do not forget to support the information you provide with valid references. Now, I will give floor to Orestea, and she will tell us more.
Thank you, Betty, for this detailed explanation. At this point, I would like to present some results after performing these commodity risk assessments. So EFSA, with the activity carried out so far on high-risk plants, has identified some potentially dangerous pests associated with these high-risk commodities. In case you want to learn more about these outputs, you can check all the published opinions compiled on this link that is provided. Some take-home messages for you from this webinar are that the information and data provided by third countries are the basis used when developing commodity risk assessments. The detailed quantitative information helps us to decrease uncertainties. Remember that the commodity risk assessments are used as scientific basis to support the final decision of the risk managers. If you're interested in learning more about how you can compile a pest list and how you can prepare a dossier, please watch the previous webinars that have been organized by EFSA the last years. You can also find them on EFSA channel. And you can see here all the links that might be useful for you if you want to learn more about the European legislations. And I think now we're ready to answer to some of your questions live, right?
Yes, I think so. I can see that there are already some questions. So I think we can start. So the first question is from Adana, and she's asking, how long does it take to EFSA to complete a commodity risk assessment?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so probably Orestia, you can reply to this question.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Adana, for the question. Actually, we cannot provide specific timescales. It really depends on the dossier and its complexity. We will check if it's complete, and the commodity risk assessment will be performed in a reasonable period of time. So, yeah, we cannot give a specific timing on how long it can take, actually.
Okay. I can see another question. It is from Francesco, and he is asking, what happens if information in the dossier is not clear?
Yeah, I think it's a bit connected with the previous one. So as I explained, maybe I can reply. So as I explained before, it's very important that the dossiers are clear and contain all the information requested. It's important to include information regarding the commodity, the cultivation process, the potential associated pests, etc. But still, it can happen that the information provided are not completely clear. So EFSA has to contact the National Plant Protection Organization of the third country to request additional information. So we have another question from Yun Seo, and he's asking, in the presentation, you mentioned that it's important to provide information regarding the vegetation and land use around the nurseries. What do you mean with this and why?
Okay, I think I will take over because I was talking about that.
Okay.
So thank you for the question. Indeed, this information is very important to us because it allows us to know if the pest can be present in the surrounding of the areas or of the nurseries, and that it can enter inside. And that's why we need to know whether or which plant species are around, if there is some forests, or if there are some fields of potatoes, which can be host plants for the pest. And it will be good to also provide, for example, some kind of radius of the nurseries. For example, for a good flyers, it can take, for example, 20 or more kilometers to reach the nursery. And for the other insects, it could be less, but it's good to indicate also the weed species and all the plants which are around, preferably. And in case these information won't be in the dossier, EFSA will ask about them. Okay. So there is another question from Petra, and she is asking, are science and rootstocks of Malus domestica the same commodity or not? Do I have to send different dossiers? Maybe.
Yeah, yes, actually I would like to reply to this question. And this is a really, really important point, so I'm happy to highlight it. In fact, even if science and rootstock are belongs to the same species, in this case we have the example of Malus domestica, they are two different commodities. And that it means that EFSA will prepare two different risk assessment. This is because two different commodities can differ in the pest potentially associated, can have different reduction option applied, and so the final likelihood of pest free will be really different. We can, for example, think to the soil-borne pathogens. They would be probably present in the rootstock, but they cannot be present in the scion. So, since EFSA will make an assessment for each type of commodity, what EFSA strongly suggests is to prepare two different dossiers for each type of commodity. Thanks.
Thank you, Laura. There is another question from Juan Carlo. And the question is, I want to explore plants for planting for Prunus domestica and Prunus dulcis. What should I do? Should I submit 2 dossiers or just one?
Okay, thanks Juan Carlo for the question. I would like to reply since it's really connected to the previous question. And as it was the case for two different commodities, also for two different species, EFSA will prepare two different risk assessments, even if the species belongs to the same genus. In this case, Juan Carlo mentioned Prunus domesticans and Prunus dulcis. So again, what EFSA suggests also to have more clearly information is to submit a specific dossier for each plant species. And thanks for the question. It was a really important point to highlight. So if we continue with question, we have a question from Emily, and she's asking, we are using pesticide to control insect pest. You mentioned in the webinar that details on pesticide and use of phytosanitary product is very important. What do you mean? What type of information is important to provide in the dossier? Can you please explain?
I think it's connected to my slide. So thank you again for the question, Emily. And yes, it is very important to give detailed information on the pesticides, such as the dosage or whether the pesticide is systematic or not, whether you change the pesticides during the year, or how many applications you provide. And also, for example, the targeted pest, and whether you can also provide some efficacy if possible, of course. And if these informations, again, won't be in a dossier, EFSA will ask for them after the first check of the dossier.
Thank you, Betty. Yeah, I think we're running out of time, so we have to close the Q&A session at this point. So at this point, I would like to thank all our colleagues from Plant Health team, and especially also the Humane and Corsair unit for the technical and logistic support.
And in case we did not manage to answer all your questions, please feel free to resubmit them by email, which you can see on this slide. And please take also 5 minutes more to fill out the evaluation form that you will receive shortly in the inbox. Your feedback will help us to improve our service. We would like to thank you all for your attendance, and please note that this webinar is being recorded and it will be published into the webinar's main page some days after the presentation. And feel free to follow us on Twitter or any other website which is mentioned on this slide. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.